to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Roll call.
Jeff Renahan, First Ward.
Bill Carlos, Second Ward.
Joe Conti, Third Ward.
Joseph Lepore, Fifth Ward.
Ann Churchin, Sixth Ward.
Felicia Salvatore, Town Clerk.
Jim Nelson, attorney for the town with
Danielle Strauch.
John Baisley, Town Supervisor. Welcome, everybody. Tonight's Town Board meeting, we just have 4 items. They're set dates for public hearing for 3 items in the Hamburg, truck code amendments, noise amendments, and no left turn. And the 4th one is just a retention of a consultant for doing a secret documents in relation to those amendments. I'd like to make a motion to suspend the rules for any public comment on any agenda items.
I'll second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Anybody like to discuss any item on the agenda at this time? If not, I make a motion to resume the rules.
Second.
Second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Burford.
Yeah.
Resolution 1, be it resolved that the Town Board of the Town of Poughkeepsie does hereby set the 7th day of June 2017 at 7 p.m. at the Town Hall, Town of Poughkeepsie, 1 Over Rocker Road, Poughkeepsie, New York, as the date, place, and time of a public hearing to consider the adoption of a local law amending Town of Poughkeepsie Code Chapter 195 entitled Vehicle and Traffic, which amendments will alter the weekly schedule of truck weight and length limitation in New Hamburg area of the town contained in section 195, 46B and C, and an emergency exception, section 195-46D, and authorized signage. And be it further resolved that the proposed local law amendments are attached hereto and incorporated herein, with the language to be added being underscored and the language to be deleted being stricken, and the town board does hereby waive a verbatim reading of said amendments and does direct that said amendment be spread across the record as if they, in fact, had been read verbatim. And be it further resolved that the town board of the town of Poughkeepsie does hereby declare this action to be an unlisted action pursuant to 6 NYCRR 617.2 AK of the SECR regulations, finds that there are no other involved agencies for SECR purposes, accepts Part 1 of the Annex Short Environmental Assessment Form with narrative statements annexed, authorizes the supervisor to execute said Part 1, and be it further resolved that the said local law, if adopted, shall take effect immediately upon filing with the Secretary of State. So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any questions on this one? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes 6-0.
Be it resolved that the Town Board of the Town of Poughkeepsie does hereby set the 7th day of June 2017 at 7 p.m. at the Town Hall, Town of Poughkeepsie, 1 Over Rocker Road, Poughkeepsie, New York, as the date, place, and time of a public hearing to consider adoption of a local law amending the Town of Poughkeepsie Code, Chapter 139, entitled Noise, which amendments will add new Section 139.7 Motor Carriers Engaged in Interstate Commerce and 139.8 Barge and Vessel Noise Emissions, and renumber other existing sections. And be it further resolved that the proposed local law amendments are attached hereto and incorporated herein, with the language to be added being underscored and the language to be deleted being stricken with a line through it. And the town board does hereby waive a verbatim reading of said amendments and does direct that said amendments be spread across the record as if they had in fact been read verbatim. Be it further resolved that the town board of the town of Poughkeepsie does hereby declare this action to be an unlisted action pursuant to 6 NCRR 617.2 AK of the SECR regulations, finds there are no other involved agency for SECR purposes, accepts Part 1 of the annexed Short Environmental Assessment Form EAF with the narrative statement annexed, authorizes the supervisor to execute said Part 1, and be it further resolved that if the state said local law, if adopted, shall take place immediately upon filing with the Secretary of State. So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any questions on that one? All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes 6-0.
Be it resolved that the town board of the town of Poughkeepsie does hereby set the 7th day of June 2017 at 7 PM at the town hall, town of Poughkeepsie, 1 Over Rocker Road, Poughkeepsie, New York, as and for the time, date, and place of a public hearing to consider the adoption of a local law amending Town Code Chapter 195 entitled Vehicles and Traffic, specifically Section 19541, Schedule 6, entitled Prohibited Turns at Intersections, to add the following underlying language to Section 19541, Schedule 6 as follows. The name of the street will be Main Street in New Hamburg. The direction of travel will be northeast. The prohibited turn will be left. The hours will be all, and it'll be at the intersection of Bridge Street at the northeast fork. Be it further resolved that the town board of the town of Poughkeepsie determines that although this is a type 2 action requiring no environmental review, its adoption is being reviewed under seeker with the adoption of truck length and width, Chapter 195, and noise, Chapter 139. Local law amendments to the town code, and be it further resolved that if adopted, said local law shall become effective immediately upon filing with the Secretary of State. So moved.
Second.
Motion second. Questions on that one? All those in favor?
Aye.
Before moving to the next item, which would be the retention of a seeker consultant to work with the board on the evaluation of those three local laws, I can tell you that the planning department and the legal department spoke at some length today with Rich Pearson, who is a traffic engineer who has worked several times with the planning board and otherwise with the town. And Mr. Pearson is going to be sending Mr. Wilson a proposal. We anticipate that we will have a proposed retainer for your consideration by next Wednesday's meeting. It will be on an hourly basis, and we're moving ahead.
Thank you, sir.
Pardon me. Thank you. You're welcome.
That brings us to the end of our meeting. Do we make a motion to suspend the rules for any?
Second.
Does anybody like to discuss anything related to the town of Poughkeepsie at all? If not, could a motion to resume the rules?
Second.
Second? All those in favor?
Aye.
All right, that's the end of our town board meeting. Could I make a motion to close the town board meeting at 7:07?
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Now we will go on to our committee of the whole meeting. We have a presentation tonight by Jacob Ruckus, the redevelopment of the Raymond Avenue School property. Welcome, Jacob and crew. Come on up. It's all yours for now.
Plug and play. Did you talk to Mark about it? Yeah, Mark said that, just there's a VGA or a HDMI hookup here, and that somebody might be. Maybe somebody back in the control room, I guess? Hi, folks.
We gotta get somebody to spend some time and spend some money to fix this. Go through this every single time.
Do you need another hookup? Do you need another hookup?
This was supposed to do it.
That's what I need, right?
Okay, that's in the right spot. Forgot that. So can you take some of those? Just around here. The projector's warming up. So got it. Okay. Arthur S. May School. Depending on how old you are. Okay, your business.
Is it out over the TV?
Thank you, pal.
too? Is it out over the TV too?
When I push the button in there, yeah. Okay.
And we're live.
Nice mood and everything.
There we go. If you might want to start, it might take a few minutes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I thought we should wait for Jake.
Appreciate that.
All right, well, good evening, everybody, and thank you for having us here. My name is Jacob Reckes from POS Management, based in the town of Poughkeepsie. I have with me here Brett Balzer and Sean Tuck from Sean Corp from Balzer and Tuck Architects, based in Saratoga, and they're going to help us share what we're thinking and what we're looking at for the project at the Arthur May site. Just to give a little bit of background, so as I mentioned, we're a Poughkeepsie-based group. We were made aware that the Arlington School District was putting the property up for sale through a public bid a number of months ago. We submitted a bid, closed bid. We were actually not the original winner of that bid. There was another group that came in, was the highest bidder, had done a little bit of work on the project, and then walked away. We got a phone call asking if we were still interested, and we said we were. I can share, in part, one of the reasons that we're so interested is, as I mentioned, just being local. I grew up 7 minutes from that site. It's on my bike route. It's something that actually means something to our family. It's also one of my favorite parts within the greater community, and so I think it's got a lot to offer already, and so what's exciting is the opportunity to help expand that site and offer some more for the community. We brought in to the project a few different players to help us evaluate what the options might be. So as I mentioned, Brett and Sean are architects from Balzer and Tuck. They can explain a little bit about their background, and what drew us to them was one of the first comments that they made. We asked them, what their style is or isn't, and they really made a good case that their style is to understand the local market and design for the local community. So that's something that is very important to us. We've also been working with Chazen, and Richard Cantor has been helping. So I'm going to turn it over, and I'll be here for questions.
Thank you. We're going to walk you through a presentation tonight. There's several slides, and we were charged with two things: understanding the viability of keeping the existing school as part of this mixed-use development, and then weighing that against, if the school were to be demolished, what would that do for this mixed-use development? So it was with two separate lenses that we were asked to do this study. So we'll share with you the results of both those studies. And just walking you through the slides, I think maybe we'll go through the presentation, then we can open it up for a Q&A after that. I think you're all familiar with the site aerial here, Raymond Ave and the arterial to the north. I'll briefly go through this. We, in conjunction with Chazen Companies, a local group, have worked together to come up with sort of the viability of this site. The first charge was to analyze the existing structure, get intimately familiar with the existing school building. And we did that, went out and fully documented it, understood what it was about, and we'll share that with you. We wanted to understand the historic designation, if that existed, and the availability of tax credits. We'll talk a little bit about that. Just the general pros and cons of reusing the existing school. And then if we didn't use it, what would happen in its place? So the charge was from Jacob and his team, a mixed-use development consisting of both ground floor commercial and retail, along with apartments. The interest of continuing the commercial corridor was evident to them. It's evident in your town code, and I think it'll be evident in some of the slides. The idea of making this pedestrian environment, creating a downtown feel that sort of connects really from the arterial over to the college. Understanding that there's going to be a parking requirement, and how do we address that? How do we best address that with land planning? And then what does this project mean for potential future development in the area? So to the left, Chazen Companies, some of their qualifications were sort of the unknown in the room. We're based out of Saratoga Springs, New York. We do a lot of mixed-use development, adaptive reuse work. Some of the projects are listed here. You can jump on our website, sort of understand who we are a little better. I think we have a resume that qualifies us to understand this site and sort of the forces at work that we'll talk about tonight. I'll turn it over to Sean here. Go ahead.
Need that work?
Yeah, I will.
All right, so here we have a slide of the existing site. So we have the existing school building here. The original section in the middle here was built in the 1920s. In the 1930s, additions were made to the south and to the north. And then later on, there were additions off to the west, to the back of the building. These are single-story additions. I think back here, there's a gymnasium and a auditorium, if you will. And then back here, I believe, is more storage space for phys ed. To the north, we have the arterial. To the east, we have Raymond Avenue. There is this drive lane, this looping drive lane, as part of the front of the site that creates a little park or green space, if you will. That the main entrance and its pedimented front and grand staircase come down into this green space. To the south is a parking lot, and then there's the athletic fields in the back with a track that runs around them. And then to the west and creeping into the north, there's a bit of a knoll here, a rock outcropping that is heavily treed, if you will.
So not to share with you your town code, I'm sure you know it well, but as we got familiar with it, we wanted to pick out the highlights that really would drive this project, at least in our mind's eye. Obviously, the idea of mixed-use, multi-story, how do we sensitively introduce a mixed-use complex on Raymond? How do we scale that so it is in keeping with the street, but also gets the density that the developer needs to make this a viable project? So we'll talk about the scale of buildings and how those operate. The idea that this is a pedestrian connection, sidewalks, connectivity, ground floor activity, commercial, retail, and the like. And then where do we park? How do we fit all of these people on this site and sort of communicate with the street? So understanding your code and pulling from it some of those key elements, these graphics are right from your code, which we also keyed in on.
So starting off, the charge that Jacob and his team brought to our office was to, I think Brett mentioned this, to create a pedestrian-friendly environment, a somewhat urban environment with a mix of commercial and residential uses. They were looking for between 10 and 20,000 square feet of commercial space and 250 apartments with the parking to go with that. So we started off by looking at the school and keeping the school. That was clearly a desire from Jacob and his team. And so here we have the existing school. Part of the charge was to continue the commercial corridor along Raymond Avenue. And so we have located this building A here. This would have commercial spaces on the first floor. It's a 3-story building, so there'd be 2 stories of residential units above building A. As you pull into the site, we have parking flanking this drive lane that allows you to come back to these 3 new buildings in the rear of the site. Buildings B, C, and D, these are all 5-story buildings. The idea is that these buildings on the ground floor would have enclosed parking garages. So that way the residents would have some enclosed parking and then some surface parking. In order to maximize the parking on the site, because the demand is quite high with the number of apartments and commercial space that we're trying to fit on it, we are required to have this parking lot in between the existing school and this new building A. We were trying to, one of the challenges with this proposed site plan is that this new building kind of conceals the existing building from Raymond Avenue. And so one of the challenges we were trying to overcome with this is a possibility of a pedestrian access in the middle of the building where you could, from Raymond Avenue on the sidewalk here, walk underneath the building between commercial spaces and be able to come out on the west side of Building A and catch a glimpse of the existing building. The whole part of the reason to keep the building is the historic value of it, the history of the site, and the community's appreciation of the existing building and its history. So, placing this building here and screening it from the public seemed counterintuitive. So we're trying to make up for that with this pedestrian connection here.
And I should add, so what we're going to show tonight is two different sets of plans. So Brett and Sean are talking about what we charge them with. Our goal is really to establish, as they said, a mixed-use project with density that allows, number one, for us to actually build out the site. It's not going to be an easy site to build out. For it to be sustainable and to bring as much life into the Arlington Town Center as we can. In order to do that, we actually started with our first plan of asking them to show us some plans that keep the school. That was always our initial intention. And that's where we started with the first set of plans. Through that process, we then realized that there's a couple complications with that, and they'll get to that. So I just want to there are going to be two different sets of plans that we're going to show right here.
So this particular site plan yields, where does it say here? 15,000 square feet of commercial space in Building A. So that hits the target of 10 to 20,000 square feet. We get 196 apartment on the upper floors of buildings A, B, C, and D. And within the existing school, we were able to fit 22 apartments in the existing school. And then we've the problem with this is that because we've got just shy of 200 apartments, we're about 50 apartments short of the projected goal of 250 apartments. Parking-wise, we're required to provide 1.5 parking spaces per apartment, and then there's a calculation for required parking for the commercial spaces. With the surface lots here and the enclosed parking garages in buildings B, C, and D, we are 30 parking spots deficient of what we're providing here. If we were able to increase the height, perhaps, of buildings B, C, and D in order to make up for those 50 apartments that we're missing, we would be 100 spaces shy of the required parking. So that's some of the challenges we're facing with this particular option. This is a crude massing diagram. This does not imply what the architecture of the buildings would look like. It's really used by us to get an overall idea of the mass and scale of the proposed buildings in the development. And so here we have Raymond Avenue in front, the existing building massed up where it sits on the site. This is that knoll, the wooded knoll on the north and west side of the site. And here is the new 3-story building that we're introducing on Raymond Avenue with its pedestrian connection back to the parking lot behind where you can catch a glimpse of the school. And as you enter the site here, you work your way back to the 3 5-story buildings and the back of the site. What this starts to emphasize is how this building really starts to screen your view of the existing school. And then this is another diagram. We've taken that massing diagram from the previous slide and input it into Google Earth. The town of Poughkeepsie happens to be one of the municipalities that Google Earth has done some 3D modeling of. It's a little bit skewed because they're taking a flat satellite image and extruding it. But just to give you an idea, here is the new 3-story building along Raymond Avenue. We're at about 38 feet for our new building. Across the street, we have this church, and the ridge of that church is about 45 feet above the street, and that does include, there's a small knoll, or hill that church sits on. So it's, the first floor of it's raised up above the sidewalk. As you continue, I'm losing my laser pointer. As we continue down northward on Raymond Avenue, there's another 3-story building here. It's about 42 feet tall. And on the corner at this intersection, these two buildings are also about 36 feet tall, 3 stories. To the south, we have the College View Towers. That's a 9-story building. We're estimating it's about 90 feet tall. We're assuming it's concrete plank construction, 10-foot floor-to-floor heights due to that type of construction. So there's a 90-foot building here, set back behind the buildings that face Raymond Avenue, which is where we kind of, that zone is kind of where we're locating our 3 new 5-story buildings. Our 5-story buildings, due to the type of construction that we're proposing, are about 60 feet tall. So less stories, but not quite the same. Half the number of stories, but not quite half the building height, if you will.
So I'll just quickly share the analysis of the existing school is pertinent to the conversation. And when we went out and did our field measure, we also were able to get the existing construction documents from when the school was built and just diagrammatically share with you what we've learned. As we look at adaptive reuse of historic buildings, one of the things we need to look at is efficiency of those buildings. And what we look at here is a fairly inefficient structure for an adaptive reuse for apartments. Reason being, what we'll see in red here is a 10-foot corridor in apartment construction. We only require a 5-foot corridor. So we immediately tag that as an inefficient space to the tune of about 5% of the gross building area. So we're sort of starting with a 5% deficit as we plan this out. Some of the other issues here, the structure of the building, it's a load-bearing masonry wall building, a very difficult structure to adaptively reuse in a sensible structural manner, meaning anytime we look at taking down a wall, we're supporting that with steel, we're chasing to the foundation with footing. So the dollars keep heading upwards as walls come down, and they will need to come down in the event that this were turned into something other than a school. And then we look at it sectionally, and what's deceiving with this building, we all know it is a 3-story building. There's actually over 12 level changes within the building. So from an accessibility standpoint, we're looking at a lot of elevators, a lot of ramping, yet more inefficiency. This is not just a clean run an elevator up, hit 3 stories, and we're good to go. This is really gets to be a bit of a puzzle on how we circulate vertically and horizontally throughout this building if we were to adaptively reuse it. As we look at tax credits, backing up a little, both state and federal, there's the possibility of a 20% tax credit if this building were listed. Maybe I'll turn it over to you if you want to share a little bit about your thoughts.
Sure. So, we approached the site knowing that there was an old building that we hope to keep. So typically when you look at historic sites, if they can be listed on the National Registry of Historic Places, you're eligible to receive historic tax credits. And it's actually interesting when you look at the website that the New York State SHPO puts out, they identify that this is in essence to help achieve renovation of buildings that cost more money to build than a normal project. So the way it works is you can apply, you can submit an application to have a building listed on the registry. If it is received and approved to be on the registry, you're eligible for federal historic tax credits, which, and I'm sure I'm saying things that many of you guys know, allows 20% tax credit on what's called the qualified rehab expense of the building. So not all expenses are qualified, but most of them are, and so you get 20% of the project as a qualified tax credit. If the building is in the federal tax credit program and you use those tax credits, and it's in a qualified census tract, then you're also eligible for a 20% state historic tax credit. Unfortunately, or fortunately, this site does not qualify as a qualified census tract, which I'll be open, we put in this.
We've also checked with SHPO. That has changed since the last census, so, but continue on. Yeah, John Pinner, our town historian, is here and he'll address that, but I just wanted to let you know that up front that we had a meeting with SHPO and the census tracts have changed since the last census, which was 2010. And your information's from, 2010, your information's from 2006, so.
I would be happy, and that would be, I think, important news. I can share, so as of the current website, I checked today, and I'm totally open if there's another site that we can find this, that would be good.
Yeah.
Okay. So there's eligibility for 20% tax credits if you're in the federal program. If you're in both the federal and the state program, you're eligible to receive 40% tax credits on the qualified cost of the project. Again, it is, when we looked at this site, our goal was to repurpose the building. I can also share with you that we are involved in another project which is using a historic building. We also entered it thinking that we were going to be able to use the historic tax credits. Excuse me, I lost my voice yesterday. Once we started to dive into the building and the site and understand what this particular building has and doesn't have, what became clear is that the renovation cost of this particular site is going to be significantly more than some other historic buildings. I'll give you an example. We're working on a project in Troy, which is a historic building on the registry with an open floor plate. So the challenge is once you're listed on the registry, then SHPO, as part 2 of the process, will come in and dictate what you can and cannot do, which is usually where the extra cost comes in. Brent and Sean put together some numbers here based on sort of a run-of-the-mill, let's call it, historic tax credit renovation, which we're concerned it will actually be light for this site. And those numbers up there show how the budget kind of works out.
So the second option that we're here to present would be the hypothetical, if the school was not part of the program, what would we do with an empty 6.8 acre site? And so what we have done here is a 3-building scenario where we again continue the commercial corridor along Raymond Avenue with the east end of Building B and this the long leg, the eastern egg, north-south leg of Building A, where we'd have commercial spaces accessed along Raymond Avenue, continuing the commercial corridor to the arterial. We would then create this boulevard, if you will, a tree-lined boulevard with on-street parking on either side, a median down the middle. We're looking at the intersection of this new boulevard and Raymond Avenue, creating some kind of public space, a plaza or a park of some sort, which would be the main entrance to Building A, and could possibly be, if this were to become, if this commercial tenant were to become a cafe or a restaurant, the seating for that could spill out into this public space. As we continue down the boulevard, the end of the boulevard would be capped with this new Building C. And again, this would become more of a street than just an open parking lot. This is more pedestrian friendly than what we had proposed in the previous slide, in that people, as they walk from, the residents as they walk from Building C, as they come down to go to Raymond Avenue and the shops and the restaurants that are there, they'd be walking down a nice tree-lined street rather than having parking lots on either side of the road that they'd be walking down. We're also talking about creating another little public area in the back here. This would be an amenity space not only for the residents of these buildings, but it would also be open to the public. And creating a new public trail around the building, taking advantage of the green space on the western end of the site. All of the parking would be hidden behind the buildings, to the west of Building C, to the north of Building A. So it's screened from the public view as people are traveling down Raymond Avenue and on these new internal roads. Clearly, we're also introducing enclosed parking on the first floor of Building A, B, and C. As far as building heights and massing go, if you want to flip to the next slide, we're proposing here along Raymond Avenue that the one leg of Building A would be 3 stories, and the east end of Building B would also be 3 stories, maintaining that lower height along Raymond Avenue. And then as we progress down the boulevard into the site, the buildings raise to 5 stories.
And so I just want to point out, so what we're seeing here is something that is really getting a little bit better towards what we were hoping to achieve with the project, which is to connect to what already exists within the town center where Vassar is, to extend the walking corridor from the corner where Vassar is all the way out, to bring something along the street. And I think you kind of glossed over it, but the real vision is to help create this community that has some walking spaces, some outdoor spaces, to allow people to make this a destination and to also help feed other businesses that are along that street.
Just to go back, to hit on what we were able to achieve in introducing this scheme, we start to hit the goals that were made a requirement of this project. We hit the parking, we hit the number of units that were required. So it goes to density, and it goes to what we think is a sort of a thoughtful reaction to the street and our interpretation of the code, where it's the 2 to 3 stories along Raymond Avenue, and then as we progress further back in the site, the density goes up, and then we use that to mask the parking. So that's some literal interpretation of the code. And then we're back to a similar diagram that we showed before, where we point out the heights. I won't go over that again, but here we are in 5 stories in the rear of the site, 3 stories in the front of the site, and the neighboring college tower is at 90 feet. So similar scale buildings, just in a different configuration. So this is the sort of summary, if you will, of what we've learned on this adventure. When we look at retaining the existing school, we end up with a deficiency in the apartment count based on our charge to try and hit the 250 number. We end up with inadequate parking, which often leads to a failed project right out of the gate. The lack of really the public amenity or green space that Jacob hit on the second scheme, it's somewhat non-existent. I think as you sort of look at the two side by side, there's a little more, there is hopefully a lot more walkability, pedestrian activity on the scheme to the right than there is to the left. The idea of this saving the school, while it's saved in the scheme to the left, it's not seen. We're reacting to the needs of the client, but also the requirements of the code that talk about continuing the commercial corridor along Raymond Avenue. And in doing that, we have no choice but to mask the school. So that's just an inherent sort of quality of this scheme. The idea, if we were to adaptively reuse, leads to an immediate increase in costs in the dollar per square foot of the project. So programmatically, as we look at this, we understand that there's a much larger hit early on if we're trying to pull this off, and the numbers don't quite shake out, particularly when you don't hit those parking counts and those unit counts. And then, as we'll probably get into a little bit more about the historic tax credit aspect of this, this project does not exist in retaining the existing school without a significant help with historic tax credits. When we look at the proposed plan without the school, we start to see that we've hit the apartment count. The requirement of that 250, we're just above it. We're a parking space above it for what that's worth. the public amenity and green space. That's where we start to really try and make this project not about Jacob and his team, but more about a position in the town and how it could be a building that's of use and it's sort of an amenity to the public along Raymond. The idea that we've increased the sort of pedestrian connectivity of the site, along with screening the parking, so you're not looking at parking lots while walking down Raymond, they're screened from view. And then what we're looking at, and we've been successful in other projects, is how do we historically acknowledge that there was a structure here that is meaningful to a lot of folks, some of which may be on this board, some of which may be in the audience. And while it's too early to tell how the building would come down if it were to come down, what can we reuse? What are those pieces that might make sense to do a historic nod towards the building it once was? So the idea of sort of populating the site with these pieces, perhaps using it in some of the new architecture, we would work to sort of show you how that happens. But at this point, it's a bit early to tell.
So I think that's the last slide of the showing, and I think, our goal is, as Brett said, this really has been an adventure. In truth, we took a little bit more time to work out the various plans than we had wanted to, and one of the main causes was we really wanted to make sure that we were presenting something that made sense, that we'd looked at all the different factors, and I think while we started in one position trying to come up with a project that could be sustainable, that could hit the numbers in order to build it, Brett and Sean came to us and said, I think we have a problem. The two challenges, as they just showed with the site, is it is a much more complex building on the inside than it appears on the outside, and it's in the wrong spot on that site. And so those two things together, the plans that they were showing us just didn't hit the goal that we were trying to achieve. And so we said, okay, come back to us with something else. And they came back to us with multiple other pieces. And so we're grateful for the opportunity to sit and basically show what we were told. We asked them for a straight up objective presentation, pros and cons of both. They did that, and so we wanted to share it with you, and would be open to any questions.
Hey, Jacob, thanks. What I'd like to do is start with Jeff and work your way across. If there's any questions?
Yeah, just the one question. I was looking at both those diagrams, and I noticed you talk about parking, how it's very tight there. Was there any consideration for like emergency access lanes as well? Because I noticed around those buildings you have parking spots right next to those buildings. So I think you're going to have to accommodate emergency vehicle access to those buildings as well.
Yeah, not to get into the New York State Building Code too much, but introducing sprinklers in a building allows for accessibility requirements to be somewhat downsized, but often, in all cases, we're working with the local fire department, sitting with the fire chief and saying, here's what we're proposing. How do you propose staging it in the event of a fire? But right now, this, as per the New York State Building Code and the fact that we're sprinkling these structures, this is all possible. Nothing we're showing is dead ends or inaccessible to fire truck apparatus.
Okay, because I'm looking at those drawings now, I'm just wondering where they would place, like I said, an aerial device close enough to those buildings. I know, like you said, sprinklers are in the buildings, but they still, possibly if there's failure, you still need to have something there that would be accessible for, them to set up for a rescue if need be.
Yeah. I think, again, I don't want to harp on the code, but much of this is set up, rated corridors, rated floor, rated construction between floors, rated stair towers for two means of egress. Those things start to add on. There's a very
Standpipes and all that stuff.
very specific recipe on what's allowable and what isn't when you're talking about the safety of occupants.
Turn radiuses were factored.
Turn radiuses as well.
Okay.
Mr. Carlos?
Your turn radiuses involve the ability to have the Arlington Tower truck turn in there?
Yes. Right. Yeah. Stu was.
Yeah, Stuart Messing with Jason, we put the town's fire truck turn radius on there, and I think we'll probably need some.
Stu, you have to come up and speak of that.
I knew you guys were going to.
You're not getting away that easy.
Yeah, that's right. All right. Stu Messinger with Chase and Companies. Yeah, we put the town's fire truck turn radius template on here, and we're able to get around all the buildings. In this plan, we'd probably need some mountable curbs to do it properly.
And snow storage?
Good question. We haven't engineered it yet.
Okay. The 250 apartments, is that, we're telling you it's going to be 250, or you're telling us it's going to be 250?
So that's our project goal to hit the numbers. I mean, I'm not going to pretend that it has to be exactly 250, but that's our project goal based on.
So it's the goal in terms of the income from the rentals to make this project profitable?
To make this project
Profitable is not a bad word.
Yeah, okay, sustainable is kind of the goal. Everybody has different.
The school has been there since I've been in town, 1968. And it's part of the Arlington structure, if you know what I mean. I understand the plan that we're looking at here. If you look at the plan with the building, and you qualify for the 40% credits, but you fall short on your 250 apartments, could you put more stories on building B, C, and D? And does that help with the equation?
So
In other words, keep the building, make it part of the structure, okay? And raise, if you're at 5 stories, a 6th or a 7th story. Isn't College View Towers 9 stories?
It is.
So even if you went to 7, is that enough apartments?
I think you're going along I'd like to say the right line of thought, because that's exactly the line of thought we went by, so I hope it's the right line of thought. The challenge and complication you go is that what we're actually showing here is a podium construction with 4 stories of residential on top of it, and that's very intentional, because then we can stick to wood construction. Once you go above that, you change the type of construction, and you guys can speak better to it, but it blew the pro forma out. So the cost of that building, even though it's only 1 extra story, is considerable.
So in other words, the structure itself has to be bigger, therefore there's less space inside the building.
I think what happens is in a 5-story building, it's what we call podium-style construction. So we come out of the ground with steel and concrete, and then on top of that concrete platform, we sit a 4-story wood frame structure. When you go to that, stories above that, that wood structure no longer supports those stories. So we take the steel off and we introduce a steel frame structure, metal deck, concrete, a very commercial style construction, which in $1 per square foot is quite a bit more than wood frame construction. So all of these mixed-use developments that we're doing top out about that 5-story, because the pro formas, as Jacob said, blow out. They don't work once you start to introduce that second structure.
Okay.
The other part of that is the parking. Even if we were to go 10 stories, the concern or the problem is we can't park it. We can't get the tenants a parking spot. We can't hit the 1.5 per unit. So the parking becomes a major issue. Even if we were to ground floor park, the size of these buildings, dimensions at 70 feet is sort of the sweet spot for residential. You can't circulate in a multi-story garage. So the idea of, why don't we just do a parking garage doesn't exist within this podium model. Mm-hmm. So all of these things you're right along the lines of everything we've studied and sort of know to be what drives these pro formas, what drives development. It really is, it ends up being this magical formula of podium-style construction, wood frame above, needs to support the parking. Once one of those things changes, the pro forma fails. And that's generalizing, but that is what we see as we go through these in this development and really any of the others that we're doing. So we end up in this sort of recipe for mixed use.
So
Yeah.
the profitability of your project rests on the demolition of the school building.
Yeah.
So if the community said to you, we really want to see the school building stay here, then your question is whether the project is viable at all for you as a developer.
Correct, and unfortunately, right now, the answer to that is we could not figure out how to make that work.
Okay, there's always ways to figure stuff out. I'm just trying to get down to the bottom line with respect to you and to actively encourage you to think local, stay local, build
Yeah.
local, okay? My question is to understand more about how it works, to stay within your profitability, but to protect the building. If there's a way that the inside of the building, you're saying that it's not suitable for putting apartments in because the hallway is too wide?
The hallway being wide is one factor, but can we go to the split levels? So, and we had and we can, as long as the school district will allow it, because we need their approval to walk in it, but they've been very supportive so far. We could do another tour. We did a tour for board members who were interested. When you walk in, I mean, it looks like a school from the outside. It's built more as a roller coaster. I swear. I mean, it's
I'm very familiar with the building.
Right, yeah,
I worked
okay.
for Arlington. I did the study
Okay.
on the building.
right,
So-
and you're probably in shape because of it. So the challenge is, well, there are a few challenges. One of them is accessibility. A major one is accessibility. So as you see, you're walking in on one platform, you're going down the stairs. That's one level. You can maybe fit one, maybe two apartments there. You're going up the stairs. Another level. On the ground floor, then you go down again, up again, and across. It is, I mean, like we've been saying this is a joke, but it's no joke. When they built this building, they were not thinking about the repurposed use when the school moved out.
No, they built it to be a bomb shelter.
Yeah. And that is a challenge. And we, as I said, we have struggled we didn't come to you, we're not coming to you lightly, and we're really trying to introduce to you what the challenge that we've foreseen. But we cannot make this work with that school there.
Okay? Thank you for your honesty. Try and make this work, guys. Arlington is primary place around here, and we want to make it shine. Thank you.
Yes, I was actually hoping to hear your plan of utilizing that school and seeing that, because being a lifelong resident, you know, we've seen it, like you said earlier, and I played ball back behind there when I was a young guy. But I understand your plight. I like the fact that you're talking about bringing commercial to the front. I think that would help get that to the northern part of our town, to make that walkability work there. I don't know if that small opening really affords us the opportunity to appreciate the school back there. But I also understand your plight, that you need to, if you're gonna do this, you need it to be fairly profitable. As I sat there and I looked at it, I thought to myself, wouldn't it be nice if we could bring both of those some way together? Building A with the school in place, I was thinking if you can move that down, I know you'd lose some parking spots. On the back section where you had B, C, and D, I think if those were the numbers were right, you've got that roundabout. Could you eliminate that roundabout, add more parking spots in there, and almost make that a turn more? Again, I'm sure you probably looked at it, and I'm certainly not saying you didn't do a thorough job on it, but personally, I'd like to see the school stay. I understand the depth back from it does prohibit you from using it correctly, but I don't know, I'd find it hard to see it go.
Yeah. Appreciate that.
Yep.
Mr. Lepore?
I appreciate the presentation. I know it's a little complicated, this project, for you guys, I'm sure. I just have a few questions. So you're saying that without the school, you lose tax credit? Is that?
Without the school, we would not be eligible for historic tax credits.
Okay. Here's my idea. I mean, I love the school, and I'm a big fan of this historical, it reminds me when I was a kid, so here's my idea, and I'm not sure, maybe Jason can answer this. By keeping the school and just got the inside of the building, maintaining the structure, the outside, the shell, the facade, and put apartments inside, and by, eliminate building A, and the entire, site will look like the school today. That's option number one. And again, I'm just saying this. Option number two is, if you do eliminate the school, put a building, like building A, that looks like the school. So, because, I see a lot of zigzaggo buildings there. I would love to see more organized as far as the buildings. You know, I understand now it looks the way it is, but that's my option, and I know you're the expert, and I'm just a guy that, you know, so that's my option. I'm not too crazy about that little alcove or that passageway from Raymond Avenue going to the school back there. Safety purpose, I'm not sure if personally I like that, but I would just like to see that school gut it and build a building there, put apartments, and maybe even, I'm not sure if it's possible, put retail stores downstairs. I mean, you see a lot of buildings like this in Chelsea, New York City area, you know, old schools, old firehouse that they, apartments and schools, so.
Yeah, I appreciate the comment, and in particular, let me go to the second one first. So Balzer Tuck showed us a couple slides of other projects that they had done of similar, actually, there was one, ironically, that was somewhat similar, a building that everybody wanted to keep. They've done a lot of historic, actually keeping the buildings, let me start with that, but in one case where it had to come down, they kept elements of the building, and so again, going back to the first comment that I made, what drew us to Balzer and Tuck is that they came in, we walked around Vassar, we walked around the neighborhood, then we went back, we looked at their sites, and honestly, the first building that I looked at that they did, I said, I don't want that in Vassar, it doesn't work. And they said, exactly, because it was in an old industrial community, so it was built to look like the old industrial buildings there. Here, this is going to be within the context of Arlington. It needs to fit the context of Arlington. And the same goes for the school. We talked about showing some of the elements that we've asked them to consider. What can we keep if the building does come down? And I was kind of, advised that the danger of showing anything in particular is if we were to take it apart, you don't know what's going to hold and what's going to fall to crumbles. But there are definitely pieces of that building, and it kind of connects to, if we're going to keep the legacy of the school and the image of what it is, I mean, to me, it's this grand red brick building that has presence, right? The columns, and it's got something. So that is absolutely something that we've gone to Brett and Sean and said, you need to give us something that connects to what the history of this place was, and that might be through repurposing some of the brick, some of the exteriors, the entrances. I'm probably saying too much right now because we don't know what the building is, but yeah.
It's all bricks. So I was just trying to find out a way so you could utilize the tax break by keeping the building, keep the walls, so-called walls, and then just reconstruct inside. So it is a very complicated project. So I appreciate your presentation.
Thanks.
Yeah, hi. And, well, we've spoken about this before because this is an absolutely crucial corner in Arlington. This could make or break the Arlington district. And I mean, the Arlington district is really on a comeback. We're seeing businesses filling out in the street. We've got a whole program working on now getting Main Street dynamic and alive. So this is absolutely crucial. And I'm afraid, I've thought about this a lot. The plan without the school to me looks massive, fortress-like, and I'm not sure it looks inviting. Maybe it's because you don't have the green in it and the greenery, but I have real concerns that if it looks closed off and people don't feel welcome there, they may not have the effect that you want to have. Because to me, when I look at, especially the one with the massing, to me it looks like you're going into a fortress. It is 3 very large buildings. And there's been a lot doing with rehabbing old buildings. I mean, we've got right here in the city of Poughkeepsie, we've got the underwear factory, where you have a mixed use. You have apartments, you have workspace, you have retail space, and that brings a whole dynamic and a life to it. I was at a conference where somebody spoke about using artist lofts and how all of a sudden you revitalize an area because you have people who work there and live there and they're out in the restaurants at night. And it attracts more people in because when you have that light and that life, people feel safe and they're attracted to the area, which would be good for the rest of your apartment complex. So this is very, very critical. And lastly, I'm concerned that the 250 units seems really heavy for that area. So we'll see.
Have you seen the underwear factory in the city of Poughkeepsie? I'm sure.
I'm a huge fan of that project. I think it's phenomenal. I do think it's important to point out there are a couple differences between.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, the vertical challenges are there. I mean, it is definitely.
In addition to the building being very, very different, the project goal there, and let me take a step back an hour and start this all again. So our goal was to do a market rate mixed-use project that drives activity into Arlington Town Center. So a lot of the buildings that we're talking about for this very reason, I mean, even that building, which is easy, much cleaner, is using not just historic tax credits, but affordable tax credits.
Oh, yeah.
So
It's-
apples to oranges to the extreme. So, yeah, but I mean, I think I appreciate all your comments, and I think we need to work on making sure that that this isn't inviting. I mean, I completely agree with you about 7 acres in the middle of Arlington to have a chance to really build something that ties together is of extreme importance, and to use it as a draw. And so I think we'll focus on how to make sure that we spruce that up.
Okay. Well, my comments fall along the same line as most of the board members. Love to see a school saved. And as Ann said, we had an Arlington project, and a road project come in about Holy Trinity School, where it had the big open area, seating area. I think that's an ideal spot for the front, if they could work something like that in. I mean, you did the bit with the little park in there, but next block up, and I've discussed this with Ann and amongst everybody else there, the street is very closed in, you know, almost looks like you're coming through a tunnel from Main Street across. And that 3-story building in front, I'm afraid, gives me that same effect. If you go down further down Arlington, down around the Juliet, most of them are 2-story buildings, it's open. To me, it gives it almost that fortress-like effect. I just think there's some changes there. I don't think it's friendly enough. There's not enough green space in the whole area. Besides the back, it's all hidden. There's nothing up front that walks in and says, welcome. Almost looks like you're walking into a school, which is just grass and parking lot. I mean, I think there's some changes to be done as far as that goes. The 3-story up front, I don't like. I think reconfiguring it could be something different. And if we could find a way, if you talk to John about the tax credits that we didn't think were available, and they are, there's something there that maybe changes the goal of the project. You know, I thank you guys for all the time and effort and actually giving us 2 plans, because a lot of people don't give us 2 plans. Usually come in and say, this is what we're doing. I just hope you take everything that the board has given you and go back to the drawing board and, you know, work out what they have and see if we can go forward with it, because we all want to see it, something done there, something to make the town a better spot, because as we've all stated, I know talking to Jacob, it is either the make or break point for Arlington. This could actually perk Arlington up where everybody wants to live there, shop there, and bring all those stores that a good percent of them are still vacant or not viable or just hanging in there. This could definitely bring it back to life on the other end. And the other block is a lot of totally commercial, which closes at 4 o'clock. So you are the start of Arlington.
Yeah.
You know, Main Street, a lot of Main Street closes. A lot of Main Street has its own issues with all the road cuts and so on and so forth. So I think this is your project going forward that really has to be the prize for the town in that section of town to bring it forward. We've talked to many people over the last week or so that have been in to discuss that, the part of 44 coming down the hill, it looks way too commercial. And like where you live, everybody wants a whole different avenue to live, like more of a Soho look, where they can come, shop, park their car, and go out to dinner, and go forward from there. So I'd like you to take it, relook at it, and take everything everybody has come in, and contact the board members, and sit down with John from the Historical Society going forward, and see if you guys can work out a plan and change it. Maybe they all have some good ideas. Everybody on the board here, I think, has a great idea, so forth.
Yeah.
And, you know, actually, if you would to stay, you know, we have a small committee report to have to stay and talk to the audience to see if they have some input, you know, about what they have. You guys can, you know, stay if you don't mind, and get some of their input and get some numbers and cards and discuss. Because I look in the audience, I see quite a few faces that have a lot of input about the historical preservation of town. So instead of having everybody come up, I think you can make the contacts and they can email you back and forth and get all that information going forth, since this presentation was just to wake the board up to what was going on.
Okay, sounds great.
Yeah, and Jay, we also have key players too from the Arlington Business
Yeah.
Improvement District here too tonight, so.
Yeah, that's why I think they should get all the information. I'm looking around, I see a lot of familiar faces, so I think they should, you know, get some information from all them people, so you can sit down and you guys can maybe go meet them on a one-on-one or as a group, so you can get their input too.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank
For
you.
the presentation.
Okay, on to our committee reports.
Finance, Charlie's putting all the numbers together. We will be meeting soon, so,
Yeah, I met with Charlie this week. He'll have the first
yep.
3 months just about done. He's wrapping up, he's finished up with his AUD for the state. So once we get that part done, he'll be able to go forth for us. Fire advisory,
No report.
government operations.
Yes, I have a report. I attended the Hudson River on the Rise seminar in Hyde Park. It was very interesting. It appears the Hudson River, well, first of all, it's an estuary, so they're concerned where high tide is, and the river has raised 12 inches so far, and they're making plans for the future in case it raises 1 feet, 3 feet, or 6 feet at high tide. So they were discussing approaches communities can take for the riverfront communities, properties, and protect against this.
Land use and planning? Mike's not here. I know Mike has started looking at putting together a meeting on our master plan, to review the master plan. Personnel was Mike also. They met on some personnel issues. They discussed, they'll bring it forth to the board probably at the next meeting. Recreation?
Recreation, yes, we had a meeting on March 3rd. I'd like to mention that there was a senior prom, which was very successful. I'd like to thank the Arlington High School students, which they were very helpful. The only problem is that they did not know Frank Sinatra, because there was a lot of requests from the senior that they want Frank Sinatra and the DJ. So that was very, very nice, and it was fun to see quite a bit of people. Registration for the camps is just about 48% as first of the month, May. I'd like to report that the parks are looking beautiful, but there was some comments from Tom that's been quite a bit of complaints from the residents about dogs, people not cleaning after their dogs. So I would like to see, I asked Tom to put additional signs, on parks, and hopefully that'll help eliminate some of the complaints that Tom has been getting.
Okay.
So they are enjoying the park, so we will enjoy the park, but please try to clean after your dog.
Right.
After that, I'm done. Thank you.
Technology and equipment?
Nothing to report.
Water, sewer, highway infrastructure?
Nothing to report. I know. I'm sorry.
That's not you.
Two things to report.
Too many reports.
The first is the proposed ordinance for cutting into the town roads, especially in light of the $10 million in paving we're doing. We had to take the proposed law that came out of infrastructure and blend it into the current existing law, and that should be ready to come before us for discussion, hopefully by the next meeting, if not the meeting immediately after. The second thing is drainage, which is not fancy, it's not interesting, but it's significantly important. Ann and I spent most of this morning out looking at things that interfere in her ward, going into our ward, and that part of your ward, Joe, that goes in behind. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to do basically the same thing. Come before the board, I'll have our engineer, Don and Sean, come up and talk about a series of steps that we could start to take where we would address the drainage problems with an eye to making it so they're fixed. And I would encourage the people, you can get a hold of me through the email on the town website or from the phone number on the town website, and let me know. I don't care where you are in the town. If you have the drainage issues, I want to try and make an inventory of it for the whole town, and then come up with an idea, a plan, and small steps, start working our way through the town to try and resolve the drainage issues. If you have a nice, high, dry house, you're happy. If you don't, you're not. So if you're not happy, you're the person I want to call me or send me an email. I'll probably cringe over that, but I need to have the input so we can include it all in looking at our whole town and starting a town idea and starting slowly to work on the drainage issues so they stop being the problem. Other than that,
Did you guys have a discussion of that possible grant money I talked about?
the I'm going to go to that seminar.
Okay.
Yes, that's part of this on how to fund it. But if we have a plan, if we put all this together and we come up with a plan and we decide we're going to do it, it's much easier to get the funding. If we say we're going to do 1,000 feet of this stream or these drainage pipes or this culvert, it's easier to work from a plan than to say, give us the money and we'll figure out how we're going to use it. But I did learn from FEMA, God forbid we have another one of those terrible hurricanes or storms that comes up here, hire people, fix as much as we can, because FEMA pays for that. Unfortunately, we have to go through another superstorm, and I don't want our people to go through that. So this is all of our wards. Drainage is a problem all over, and I want to make sure that I include as much as I can. I'd rather take a little extra time and make sure we have the whole picture for the town than to jump at something. And that's what I'd like. Thank you.
Thank you. Make a motion to suspend the rules?
Second?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Does anybody like to address the board on any town issues at all? Not, we have a motion to resume the rules.
Second?
All those in favor?
Aye.
We have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Town board adjourns at 8:11 PM. Thank you and have a good evening.